you about turning everything on.
Thank you for coming.
Is that better?
Thank you. Alright, I'm going to pass around the slides.
Is my hand the camera? Yeah. Is my hand in the camera? Okay. No, it's okay.
It's not in it, but you
No,
can see it.
I get my hair straight.
Yes, it is. You're up and rolling.
Yep,
you're good. Nice job getting that started. Awesome. So the slides are being passed around. Amanda said we went around. I'm Valerie Worstress. I'm a psychologist at Spectrum Psychology Services. I also have two little kids, a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old that are in the New York Kingstown and will be coming to the North Kingstown School District. So I'm particularly invested as a parent as well. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about behavioral strategies today. Let's get started. So first I'll just share a little bit about me and my background. I'm a clinical child psychologist with a specialization in neurodevelopmental disorders, particularly autism spectrum disorders or autism or ASD. Although I have experience with ASD across the lifespan and into adulthood, I primarily work with children and adolescents and their families right now in practice. After having my two babies pretty much back to back, I opened a private practice in North Kingstown last year called Spectrum Psychology Services. And prior to that, I worked at Brown University and had an outpatient specialty autism clinic at Brigham Hospital. And then prior to that, I worked at a number of developmental clinics at university-based hospitals in the Midwest where I'm originally from. So I currently provide early childhood groups. That's going to be sensitive. Okay. It's not my laptop. I currently provide early childhood developmental evaluations to children as young as 2. Most of these children have a question of autism, but some just have general developmental delays. There's questions about language delays, or they're experiencing behavioral challenges, and their families just want to know what are the next steps, what can they do, what's a good treatment plan. I also conduct psychological assessments, including autism diagnostic evals, and I provide therapy for children with behavioral and emotional challenges, so anxiety, behavioral outbursts. Some of these kiddos have autism, some don't. I work with kids presented with a wide range of developmental and behavioral and emotional issues. And lastly, one of my favorite things to do is I provide parent training and consultation, particularly in autism, child development, and behavioral and anxiety management. So here's our agenda for today. First, I'll briefly review some prevalence data on behavioral issues, and then I'll talk about the types of disruptive behaviors, or what we mean when we say disruptive behavior. Next, I'll talk about how behaviors, especially problem behaviors, are learned using the ABC model. And then I'll also talk a little bit about why disruptive behaviors happen and what the function of these behaviors might be. And then I'll spend the majority of the time discussing behavioral strategies, including prevention strategies and consequence-based strategies such as reward systems, reinforcement, and loss of privileges. And lastly, we'll wrap up with some time for questions. So, we're going to begin with a few statistics on behavioral challenges and mental health disorders in children here in the U.S. This data is from the CDC. Mental, behavioral, and developmental disorders begin in early childhood, with 1 in 6 children aged 2 to 8 years experiencing one or more of these disorders. Behavioral problems are more common among children in that 6 to 11 year range, more so than younger or older children, but they exist across the spectrum of childhood. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety problems, behavioral problems like oppositional defiant disorder, and depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders in children. And disruptive behaviors occur across these 4 commonly diagnosed mental disorders. So, I also thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about behavioral problems in the era of COVID. According to an article in the Journal of Applied Developmental Psychology that came out just last year, parents reported an increase in parent stress and child behavioral problems in children. They were looking at ages 7 to 9, during which was the pandemic and the government shutdown, which I'm sure none of us are that surprised about, that there was an increase in those behavioral challenges. Many families are still reporting ongoing behavioral difficulties in their children post-COVID. And although we'll be focusing on the home setting for today's talk, school staff has also reported a similar pattern of behavioral difficulties in the school setting. So according to the National Center for Education Statistics, 87% of public schools report that the pandemic has negatively impacted student behavior and their social and emotional development. Specifically, the respondents reported increased incidents of disruption in the classroom, rowdiness, acts of disrespect, which they attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic and its lingering effects. So, therefore, there's a need for behavior support now more than ever. There's a lot going on. Okay, so moving into define what we're talking about when we say disruptive behavior. Here are the types of behavioral difficulties we're referring to. So, behavioral outbursts or tantrums, as people call them, can include things like screaming, crying, dropping to the floor. They also can include some of the other behaviors on this list, right? So they can include things like aggression and destructive behaviors, self-injury. Self-interest behaviors are those things that we're seeing with kids hitting themselves, biting themselves, aggression, verbal or physical, yelling, pushing, hitting, pinching. Destructive behaviors such as throwing things, tearing up paper, breaking toys. Non-compliance is one of those that can overlap with a lot of these things, right? But basically there are the kids that are not following directions and are really struggling to complete daily tasks, or there's usually a battle to complete those daily tasks, like putting on a coat. So rigidity, this is often seen in kids with anxiety and autism, but you see it in a lot of kids who are just kind of controlling in their temperament. These kiddos need things a specific way. Certain routines can't be changed without resulting in an outburst. They are also the children who struggle with transitions, such as transitioning from a preferred activity like playing or TV to a non-preferred activity such as bath or dinner. And then overactivity and impulsivity are the behaviors we associate most with ADHD. Kids who are hyperactive, they talk nonstop, they fidget, they struggle to stay seated, whereas impulsive kids, they're very impatient and they blurt out inappropriate things. They have difficulty waiting their turn and interrupt others' conversations. So when we're talking about disruptive behaviors, we're kind of thinking of this cluster, but it overlaps quite a bit. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with this. But here I'd like to review the ABC model. So a central idea behind this model is that the majority of behaviors that we display are learned. Okay? So meaning that even disruptive behaviors are the result of certain conditions in our environment or in the environment. So this does not mean parents are at fault. It just means that certain conditions in the environment result in disruptive behaviors for some kids. The good news is that your child can learn new and more appropriate ways to behave. So we're going to go through this model. A stands for antecedent. So this is what occurs before the behavior or as a trigger to the behavior. An antecedent can be an event, it can be a person, it can be an object that cues a person to do something. B is for behavior. It's a child's specific response. So any action that can be observed, timed, counted. This can be hitting, biting, screaming, throwing things. The more specific you can be about the behavior you're observing, the better, especially when planning strategies. And C is for consequence. So what occurs after and in response to that behavior? The consequence really helps maintain a behavior and makes it more likely that it will continue over time. So we're going to look at this example. There's a child wants to go in the store, right? Child starts screaming, that's the behavior we're looking at, and parent gives child the candy. So how may this parent's response cause problems in the future? Child is likely to yell again in the future because it resulted in candy, right? They kind of make that connection. So the ABC model suggests that when we set up certain antecedents and consequences to occur around a behavior, the result may be an increase or a decrease in that behavior. So that's how we're trying to. This is the kind of philosophy we're going to be using when we're deciding what strategies to try in the home setting. So, why is the behavior happening? I would say one of the biggest challenges parents and caregivers bring to me that they face is trying to figure out why their child does certain and often very problematic behaviors. So to determine why that behavior is happening, it is useful to take more of a systematic approach to try figuring out what the function or the purpose of that behavior is. So then we can decide on the best strategies for changing them. We also see that young children or children with autism in particular usually have difficulty with communication. So behaviors often serve as a form of communication, a way of communicating what is going on. But overall, for every child, behaviors are always telling us something, right? So when your child is engaging in a problem behavior, you're going to ask yourself, what is my child trying to communicate with this behavior? And examples could be like a tantrum. It could be saying, "This is too hard," or screaming at you, like, "Leave me alone, or I need a break." So keeping information about these specific antecedents and consequences surrounding a behavior can help us to better understand why a child continues to engage in that wrong behavior and how best to change it. So here's an example of a tracking sheet that I often use with families. I'm going to pass around our bigger version because I'm sure that might be a little small and a little blurry, especially for the people that are recording. So I'll pass it to you. I find that this sheet is great for getting all caregivers on the same page about what they're seeing at home too when we start really tracking something. But really what we're seeing is we're looking at these areas of sort of behavior, let's say screaming. Where did the behavior happen? We're looking at the setting for that behavior. Who's involved? Some people are triggers for certain kids, like siblings, potentially. When did the behavior happen? We're looking at maybe certain times of day are more problematic for a kid. Maybe the morning routine versus bedtime routine. So we might start to see a pattern of those things. What happened right before the behavior, right before the screaming? And then what happened after the behavior? How was it handled? And then we're doing some hypothesis testing. We're like, why do you think the behavior occurred? So it kind of gets us all on the same page, and it's a great way to communicate with other caregivers, including grandparents and other things when you're really focusing on one specific behavior at a time. But tracking that behavior can be very meaningful. Okay, so what are some common reasons for disruptive behaviors? One, a child may be trying to escape or avoid a situation, task, or demand. For instance, a child may learn to hit a sibling or to be removed from homework time because they want to escape that part. They didn't want to do it in the first place. Two, a child might be trying to get another's attention. For example, you might see kids who hit themselves or throw something to get their mom's attention immediately. Three, getting what he or she wants. A child may scream loudly when his father turns off the TV because he has learned that dad will turn that TV back on is to stop his screaming when his baby sister is napping. Right? So those three areas we see quite a bit overlap. Some of this behavior, so automatically rewarding is the fourth one. I wanted to point that out just because some behaviors are, and particularly in autism, we see this automatically rewarding cause for disruptive behaviors. And it basically is that these are naturally, the behavior itself is reinforcing and naturally rewarding to that child. We like making loud noises or hand clapping, right? Oftentimes we consider these behaviors as being motivated by several factors: sensory input, reduction in internal anxiety, or perhaps just being really pleasing to the child. In that case, we often seek a replacement behavior. So instead of hand clapping, for example, we can teach them to maybe test their hands at their sides, or give them a squeeze and fidget. These are not disruptive behaviors. They can be disruptive to the family and the environments we want to address them. But the majority of the disruptive behaviors that we kind of address in prevention strategies, and some of the strategies we'll talk about today, tend to fall in those first three categories. And once we know what the function of the behavior is, we can help us determine what strategies we shall try next. Okay. So I'm getting over all sorts of illnesses from my kids. I'm not contagious anymore, but I'm losing my voice. All right. So we're going to start with prevention strategies. So these are the antecedent-based interventions. We're focusing on the A and the ABC model here. So we've completed our FBA, or our Functional Behavior Assessment, which is just tracking our data, and decided that antecedents are the area we want to focus on. And we want to devise prevention strategies by looking at the antecedents to that problem behavior. All right, so this can be really useful for preventing or reducing those disruptive behaviors, and it also increases the engagement and the on-task behavior. It's really generally very easy to implement, and it's appropriate for all ages. So we're going to kind of go through some common strategies that are prevention-based. Okay, so doing things in small doses, changing the order of events, offering choice, changing the schedule, and visual support. So I'm going to go through these in more detail to tell you what they look like. Okay, so doing things in small doses. So some parents find that their child can handle situations for very short periods of time. So rather than avoid the situation entirely, like they're not going, the family limits the time in certain settings. So that might be going to a birthday for just a short period of it, right? We're not going to stay the whole time at the family gathering, or going to the store for a limited time. So these are kids, especially those impulsive, hyperactive kids, or those kids get easily dysregulated, especially if they're told no. Going in with a purpose and a very short window of time, where you know you have their attention, you know what items you're going to get. Doing it in small doses can be very helpful for families. Changing the order of the events. So this can be really helpful for a child who has difficulty, like all children, I feel like, stopping an enjoyable or preferred activity and transitioning and complying with a demand, right? So a child might become aggressive when his mother asks him to turn off his iPad to get dressed or ready for school. So here, the parent can reverse the order and have the child get dressed before being allowed to have their iPad time, okay, or the TV time, whatever is rewarding to that child. Offering choice. So some children overreact when demands are set in a certain way. Okay, so especially when a transition is involved, or they're told they can't have something, some kids are just really easily agitated by being told no. And any changing how that parent asks them to do something can really prevent it becoming escalated or those explosive episodes that we see. So, for example, providing choices when making requests, like giving them a choice between 2 books at bedtime. Sometimes bedtime can be a very stressful thing for families, or you have the kid who's asking for 7 books. So giving them the option and having some control over it, giving them the option of this book, or this pajama or this pajama. And they're still having control, they're still getting a say, but it's within the parameters that work for the family. And giving them choices, you're not saying, no, you can't wear that pajama. So then there's that trigger of, you told me no, but just saying things in a little bit of a different wording. It can make a big difference, surprisingly. And changing the schedule. So this can be a really powerful tool for families and can allow them to set up their own schedule in a way that works for them while also reducing the situations that often lead to disruptive behaviors. I'm a big fan of incorporating prevention strategies into a child's daily schedule. It gives you a lot of control. Changing the schedule allows us to balance parent versus child-initiated activities. It alerts kids to upcoming changes and transitions, and it can reduce that waiting time, which is sometimes very hard for kids who just can't wait. And especially those overactive repetition kids. So we also love that we can use fun activities to reward completion of less desirable activities. So this strategy is similar to the changing order of events that we talked about on the previous slide, but asking a child to stop playing outside so they can come inside and clean up all their toys is likely to be challenging. So simply just changing the order of your child's schedule so that the enjoyable activity comes after the completion of cleaning up toys may promote that better compliance that we're looking for. All right. And also establishing a routine for specific daily events. Like we talked about, some kids' in the morning routine can be very challenging, or the after-school routine can be very challenging. Can really help the child know what to expect if we have a routine for those specific areas. And that can also improve compliance. So we don't have to start with the whole schedule and have this ridiculous long list. We can start with, excuse me, figure out this language tonight. You can start with certain areas of the day that are most problematic to the kiddos. Okay, number 5, visual supports. So we use visual supports all the time as adults. We have calendars, we have to-do lists, we have reminders on our phones. I'm a post-it note person, I have post-it notes everywhere. And we have step-by-step instructions like that are terrible for putting IKEA furniture together. But we use them all the time, and they're incredibly helpful. And visual supports for kids can be just as useful, if not more, especially for those that have communication delays or for young children. But I really think they're helpful for everyone. It makes expectations for behavior more concrete and explicit for kids. It really lays things out. So, for example, visual supports can be used to set up a step-by-step presentation of daily routines. We'll look at some examples of that in a minute. So visual schedules, social stories can do that. They can indicate the passage of time. They can indicate choices that the child has, making it very clear to them. And what I really like about visual supports is that they can take the verbal language out of the sometimes heated exchanges between a parent and a child. So the more we talk, the more we tell them to do something, the louder that we get, the more emotional the child gets. And it turns into this vicious cycle sometimes, right? Like, I told you to do that 20 times, and you're repeating yourself. Having a visual aid, I feel like, can kind of take you out of it and can blame the visual. Oh, the schedule says it's next. The schedule says that you have to do this, you have to get dressed. And it can kind of minimize that dialogue that sometimes communication delays, obviously we have that explicit there, but even for kids who don't, it makes it, separates yourself a little bit from it, and I find that it can be helpful for parents. Alright, so I'm going to show you some examples of what these can look like. Visual options. So this is an example of a visual schedule. So basically it's just depicting planned activities in the order that they occur in your day. You can use a variety of visual stimuli. So you can use words for older kids, you can use pictures, you can use photographs, so making it more individualized to a child. Sometimes they love seeing like their own toothbrush or their own closet, or things like that can be helpful. Obviously, these icons are kind of used from a program called Boardmaker, which is a paid-for service. But honestly, you can just use Google Images and search and print and kind of create something that works for you. For younger kids and kids who have communication delays, sometimes starting with actual objects, so like an empty toothpaste that they use, and putting that on a cardboard, having it laid out in objects that they recognize to help them make that connection between this is what's next. Sometimes they need that more explicit, and then you can move towards pictures or words as they get older. Okay. But visual schedules I love because they can serve as a reminder of a transition. They can help them understand that there's new activity in their routine, and it can prevent behavior problems by providing a sense of predictability and promoting that flexibility that we want to see with these kids. It can also promote child's independence and foster the acquisition of new living skills. So it can build a lot of things in there that's done, and we want to make sure that we're practicing these things and we make those connections. But visual schedules can be really great. I'm going to pass around some examples of some mini schedules or some instructions. Obviously, this one is kind of for a person who is maybe missing some steps in their toilet training or just in their toileting experience. They may be forgetting to put their hands up before they walk out of the room, they rush out the door. One of the ones I will pass out has a wait 5 minutes rule on it for those kids who try to rush out of there before they really let themselves feel the physiological response that they have to be and let it actually happen. Flushing and washing hands. So there are certain times of day that might just be stressful. We don't need a whole schedule for it, but we can have living visual guides for those things. And then the other one I'll pass around is for a kiddo who had a hard time keeping their seatbelts on in the car. So kind of walking through what the expectations are for when they're in the vehicle, and having those instructions can be really, really helpful. Okay, so some of you might recognize this. Visual timers. I have one of these like this in my office. I love that it shows visually the passage of time, which can be helpful for kids to see it. A lot of timers have very abrupt beeping, and it can startle a lot of kids too, and can be unnerving. So this has that, but it can be muted, and then you can just see the passage of time. So knowing how much time they have left on a non-preferred activity versus even a preferred activity to keep prompting them to look at it can help them. Some kids do get anxious watching it, knowing that they only have so much time left. So it's kind of a balance for the child, but I still think it kind of makes things more reasonable and more visually accessible for them to know, like, okay, this is it. And some people don't have these timers, so you can just point to a number on a clock and you can wait till it gets there. But having that, again, that's that predictability, increasing their flexibility and their understanding of what to expect next for them. We have our first then, right? Love our first then cards. So I love the first then cards because it's a concise way to let a child know what to expect throughout the day. So it's very transportable, you have it with you, and it's non-preferred activity followed by preferred activity, right? So homework, and then you get to play. You get dressed, and then you get to go outside. It's just another way to kind of use very concise language without getting into a whole argument, but also just letting them know what to expect. And these things are great for younger kids, obviously, but I feel like I still use the language with the older kids. Maybe I don't have the cards, but I'm still saying, okay, well, first we have to sit down and do our highs and lows, and then we get to play a board game. Just kind of how we organize our day. It can be helpful to have these things on hand, particularly for those kids who know they have a hard time with their home time and things like that. All right. Social stories. They're exactly how they sound, right? They're visually represented stories. They describe a social situation and socially appropriate responses. They help with perspective taking. They're really great about kind of giving kids more information about context, about a situation they're not really knowing how to handle. This would be great for new experiences, such as going to a doctor's appointment, or getting a shot, or going on a plane for the first time. I feel like you can create, we'll go through in the next slide, guidelines for creating a social story, but I do find that it can be really helpful to just Google image, and find the objects you want and preparation for them to apply it to any situation that might be challenging to them. Okay, so here are our guidelines. Identify the social situation that's problematic for your child. Wanting to write the social narrative using developmentally appropriate language. So that's obviously important. I'm going to pass around some social stories that I've created over the years. My hula hoop space for teaching appropriate boundaries and personal space. Those kids who like to get really close or don't understand boundaries. Sharing with my friends. Just recognizing stranger danger. You can do it for all these different things, but you'll kind of see walking through how simplistic the language is, using photos and things that personalize it to the kid can make it much more resonate a lot more with the child. So you have your story, and then you read the narrative. So it's a great thing to have. Is there a bedtime story? You're picking your two stories, right? Which one do you want? None of them, right? We're going to talk about this one tonight, and this can be great to practice with them, right? So you read through it, you model what you want that target behavior to look like. Sometimes like, I get a shot. I'm like, ouch, that hurt for a little bit, but I'm okay. I'm going to take a deep breath, kind of modeling what you want them to do so they see it. And then you collect data on it, see if that story worked or if it needs to be modified. So always save in the files for whatever you make, because there might have been something you didn't see coming, and you can apply that. And for older kids, even then, I feel like it's helpful, especially if you incorporate their interests. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But if you can find something that is inviting to them and motivates them, they're more likely to try and practice that skill. And social stories can be a great way to introduce that. Sorry. I think it's the last thing. It's the last thing I'm handing out. Okay. All right. So another form of social story is called power cards. These are visual aids that incorporate a child's interests. They're written in that first person from a hero's perspective. They're small and portable, so they're literally just a card. So they make it really easy to kind of tuck into a backpack, or if you're communicating with the school, it can be really helpful. But it's a very short social script. It's usually a hero solves a problem and they succeed. And then it's encouraging the child to try new 3 to 5 steps behavior that you want to see them do more in that situation. So for example, this guy was obviously a clear Ninjago fan. Kai is a famous ninja. At first, he has trouble controlling his temper, but with sensing he needs help, he has learned to stay calm and think before he acts. So Kai wants me to remember that when I feel mad, I can take a deep breath, I can count to 10, I can go to my safe space, I can ask a parent for help. So it's really short, sweet, but obviously they know how to do these things. You're practicing these things with them, right? They know how to take a deep breath, they know how to count to 10, they know where their safe space is located. But also you can have icons for these things too, right? Like you can have a picture of somebody breathing, you can have numbers to indicate that they're supposed to be counting. You can kind of formulate it to what the child needs, but it's nice to have something that's like, ooh, you start to see those signs that they're getting agitated, right? Especially for this kid who's working on mood regulation or temper. You're starting to tense up, you're starting to see the movements and the signs that you recognize when your child's starting to get frustrated. And before they get to that point where there's no return, you're remembering, oh, I have this power card. Maybe seeing that interest, seeing something they enjoy, and teaching them through it can give them an opportunity to kind of teach them how to walk through that and then maybe deter it from turning into something different. So much fun today. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears and talk briefly about consequence-based interventions. So this is the C in the ABC model. Here we're going to review reinforcers or rewards that your child will work to earn by displaying positive behaviors, the behaviors you want to see more of. So reinforcers are anything that follows a child's behavior that increases that behavior. We all respond to reinforcers. Your family says, oh, that meal you made was amazing. You're more likely to make that meal again, right? Parents often use reinforcers and they don't even realize it, right? They're just saying, oh, you can play with your computer game after you clean up your toys. But they're wonderful for increasing behaviors we want to see and promoting new behaviors and skills as well. So we're going to review types of reinforcers. So primary reinforcers are food or drink, so giving a child a goldfish before bed after he puts on his pajamas. Social reinforcers are hugs, high fives, verbal praise, or any kind of social attention. So telling your child that you're so proud of them for how they follow directions in the store. Tangible reinforcers are enjoyable items. So this is a favorite toy. A parent might buy a new Matchbox car after a week of no incidents of aggression. Activities and privileges, these include going to the park or riding a bike or one-on-one time with a parent, even swimming, watching TV, things that they enjoy. And so a parent might use a trip to a favorite restaurant as a reinforcer at the, keeping their toys picked up at the end of the week. All right, and then and tokens. So tokens have no actual value. They gain value by providing a system for the child to purchase either primary or social or tangible or even activity reinforcers. So they represent a reinforcer. So for example, points or marbles, you can kind of they're great for throughout the week using them a visual. Once they make that connection between the token and the reinforcer, it can help you separate how often you're giving the reinforcer by just giving them points on board or giving them a ball. So tokens are great for that as well. Okay, so how do we use reinforcement? We go through the steps here. Step one, we're selecting the target behavior. So again, it's important, the target behavior, they're the opposite of the child's disruptive behaviors, right? Safety or safe hands, following directions, kind language, inside voice. We want to select the behavior that is contradictory to the disruptive behavior. So instead of swearing, we're using kind language. Does that make sense? So step two is keeping the behavioral requirement reasonable. So behavior needed for the reinforcer must be within the child's ability. So we might have to break difficult tasks down. So providing praise and maybe a sticker for them just pulling up their pants instead of expecting them to be successful with getting fully dressed every day for earning a favorite activity. It's just not reasonable for that child. We have to work our way up. All right, step three, decide how often to reinforce the behavior. For new behaviors, it is best to provide that reinforcement every time the child is successful. It can get a little exhausting in the beginning. But once the behaviors are learned, we can gradually decrease and fade out or even eliminate that reinforcer. Another way to maintain new behavior skill is to use something called intermittent reinforcement. So you're just kind of providing it every once in a while, but in the beginning, we really would like to reinforce it every time you see that success. Right. And step four, apply reinforcers closely after the behavior. So if there's too much time between the behavior and the reinforcer, even several seconds, too long. Some children may not understand that connection between the reinforcer and that behavior. All right. Step five, use the reinforcers contingently. So the reinforcer must follow the desired behavior. When the child does that desired behavior, they get that reinforcer. That's the behavior contingency. All right. Step six, maintain reinforcer value. So this is an important one. Some reinforcers lose their value because they're being given way too freely across a lot of settings. So if you decide on goldfish or you decide on stickers, if they're getting them in school and at home, they're just going to be tapped out. They're like, I already have so many of those things. It's not going to be motivating for them. So we want to make sure that the reinforcement has value to the child. Step seven is pairing social praise with every other type of reinforcement. So pairing social praise with a primary or an activity or a tangible reinforcer, it strengthens the overall reinforcement. And then we can also wean off maybe the tangible or the food or drink or the primary reinforcer and just have the verbal praise or the social reinforcer. But having that specific pairing makes the reinforcer much stronger. So it's also important to be very specific with your praise. You're not like, great job, have that be it. You want to have a great job using nice words with your sister. You want to be very specific about the behavior that they're doing that we want to see more of. Step 8, consider using visual supports. Big fan. Visual reminders are great, and they're obviously great with kids on the spectrum or kids with communication delays. It makes that cue and that connection between the reinforcer and the behavior much more explicit. But it's really helpful for everyone when starting a new reward system to make that really clear and make this is the part that I always make a point to mention because parents have brought this concern up to me multiple times. Some parents express concern that using reinforcers or reward systems for compliant behavior is bribery. Reinforcement and bribery are different concepts. The difference has to do with when the reinforcer is given to the child. So reinforcers are more effective when the reinforcer is offered up front instead of being negotiated after the fact, right? So for example, first you use kind words, then you get a goldfish. They know that is explicit. You made that clear from the beginning. Not if you stop swearing, I'll give you 10 goldfish, or if you brush your teeth, I'll give you 10 more minutes on the iPad, and it keeps upping the ante. You just keep offering them more and more and hope that something works. We've all done it. It makes complete sense, but it helps if the reinforcer and the behavior has been established from the very beginning, and we're making that parent feel so they're motivated to do it. All right. So lastly, I'm going to touch base on the consequence-based strategy of using privileges to change behavior. This is particularly useful for older children, and you can reduce the amount of time they have on the device as well as removing access to the device. But it's great for decreasing those unwanted disruptive behaviors. I always tell families to expect an increase in disruptive behavior before initially, because the child will be frustrated that they don't have free access to something they used to have all the access to, right? But controlling access to the TV or the iPad or the computer based on the behaviors you do or do not want to see can be very meaningful and stick with it. But it's like any behavior, it's like it'll get worse before it gets better because you're implementing a strategy and there's a change for that child. And kids don't like change, so like it's very challenging for them to adjust to those things. But it is letting them know. You also want to make sure that they're aware of this contingency. Can make a big difference in how they handle it. So they know that if they hit it, they lose that iPad. You're not springing this on them at the last minute, right? So we want to give them an opportunity to try and succeed. And that can make a difference. Okay. In summary, parenting is hard, especially parenting disruptive behaviors and having outbursts and having all these things kind of happen on a regular basis. It takes a toll on parents. Especially when you think you have it and you have all these tools in your toolbox, some things work for one child and do not work for the other. And some of this is, a lot of this is really just trial and error and figuring out what really works for your family and for your child. And, you know, once you pick a strategy, just be consistent as much as possible. And that means that across caregivers, babysitters, grandparents, if you're working on a reinforcer, you want to make sure everybody knows what that reinforcer is and the behavior you're trying to encourage to see more of, or the behavior you're trying to track. Getting everybody on the same page can be really helpful. And sometimes it does take weeks to really see a change once you've implemented a new schedule or a new reward system. When in doubt, always feel free to go back to tracking that behavior, seeing what the setting is, seeing what people are involved, what times of day are more problematic, and how people are responding to that child's problem behavior can make a difference. Behaviors change over time. And as kids get older, the problems change, right? They become more nuanced. There's other things we need to take into consideration. So going back to tracking and understanding what is the purpose of this behavior, what is the function of this behavior can be really helpful. And if you feel like you've exhausted your entire toolkit and you do not know where else to go with this, it is okay to seek guidance for someone, like a therapist who specializes in child behavior therapy, just to problem solve with you in that home environment. Kids are always throwing new things at me, and I'm always having to problem solve with parents and figure out what works for that kiddo. And I feel like it helps to sometimes have a team approach, especially when you're worn out and you're having the same behavior and you try everything. So. This is how to reach me. Obviously, you have slides, so you can contact me here, either phone or email, the website. Open things up for questions now.
I didn't talk to the question. And I thought if people had questions, so keep it up.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to sit back and hold up.
Okay, I'll be away then.
Okay.
Do you use any apps for these kids for like, cause my daughter's BCBA uses a pretty good app called ShowSports where you can customize the schedule for stuff and it can move the activity they're doing from something they have have to understand it's complete, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it depends on the family and how much they want to use technology. I love that. I feel like that's a really great. There's so many resources out there. It's hard for me to actually stay on top of all the apps that are there because sometimes I'm like, oh, I'll go check on it, and then it's like, you know, they have to pay for it, or it's not necessarily what the family's looking for, and so we're always constantly planning on which ones are good and what we want to recommend to families. But I usually rely on families because they find the best apps, usually either from school or from a provider or from a friend. But I think especially as kids get older, that's more motivating, right? Like that's something they can use, it creates independence, they're able to control and have some say in what their choices are. But you know, it's like all their peers, right? Everybody's using electronics, they're getting to like kind of use something that's meaningful for the system that they're in. And I feel like anything that they can adapt that to makes sense. What's the name of that app?
Choice
Choice words?